Hello, screenwriters. My name is Tennyson E. Stead. I am a working screenwriter. I am a working script doctor. And welcome to The Right Stuff. This is the first lesson in a 5-week course on finishing the rough draft of your feature film screenplay. Before we start, if you haven't watched it, I'm going to ask you to please watch my prelude on the most elusive and most important fundamental in screenwriting. There's a lot of vocabulary in there that we're going to be leaning on. There's some concepts in there that anyone with a literary or journalistic background is probably going to be a little bit unfamiliar with. We're going to be building on those concepts here. So please take a minute, go check out that video, and I'll be here when you're done. Thank you. Welcome back. Everyone who's watching this has seen Prelude, the most elusive and most important fundamental in screenwriting. Now we're going to start talking about how those ideas apply to the 3-act structure. Generally speaking, writers understand the 3-act structure in passive terms. There's a first act, a beginning to the story, where everything gets established and where the writer sets up the protagonist for their journey. There's a second act where things start to get real, where the protagonist starts facing real challenges. There's a moment right at the middle of the movie where the stakes are driven high enough that, everybody knows what movie we're really watching, and the scope of the film is revealed to the audience. There's a point 3/4 of the way through the movie where things get as bad as they can possibly be, and that drives us into the third act where the protagonist and the writer start looking for some kind of resolution. All of this is presented in terms of what's happening to the character. All of this is presented to the protagonist as kind of a prompt for reaction. And that's not how dramatic structure works. So what we're going to do is revisit the 3-act structure from an active place and start to understand how cinematic structure can actually be driven forward by the efforts of a protagonist to accomplish an overwhelmingly challenging goal. The first thing we need to know, and this is one of the most challenging parts of writing, because we always have ideas we want to share and things we want to say. All of those things exist in the subtext of the movie that we're about to make. Film is not a great place for a writer to have their say on any particular subject matter, because the writer is not the person who's engaging the audience. The actors are the people who are engaging the audience. Our job is to write actions for the actors to perform. We need to make sure that the actors have the tools that they need to give strong performances first and foremost. That's our job. All the themes, all the metaphors, all the artistically gratifying stuff that we kind of live for as writers lives in the subtext of the film and emerges from the action of the story. It's not stuff that we need to talk about with the audience. It's stuff that is on the screen, and we just let it be there. The first thing we need to know in writing a story is what the story is about, in the sense of what is the protagonist trying to accomplish, right? In my last video, the last one you just watched, I talk a little bit about this idea of someone trying to win an election in a totalitarian country, okay? That's an action. It takes effort. And effort is what audiences watch. So we can begin the story with the first efforts of this character to accomplish their goal, right? The first act ends when the protagonist has finished their preparations for what they're trying to accomplish, and they've started engaging the real risk of whatever it is they want to do. Right? In the case of a character who's trying to win an election against a totalitarian government, the risk begins as soon as the government realizes this person is running for office, because they're going to try and stop the character, obviously. So the moment when they put their name on the ballot, the moment when they report themselves as a candidate, is the end of the first act. And the moment that happens, they know that there's going to be efforts to frame them, efforts to capture them, efforts to interrogate them. People are going to start putting pressure on their friends and doing all these horrible things. They know that that's going to happen, which means they need a campaign that can withstand that kind of pressure before they can put their name on the ballot. They need to start going to bars and talking to people about politics. They need to start turning chance meetings into rallies. They need to start mobilizing a political movement. And only when that political movement is in motion are they really going to be able to start taking big risks. So that's going to be the work that the first act encompasses in that story. The character is preparing themselves to engage the real risks of whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. If you're making a war movie, then there's going to have to come a point when the protagonist is going to put themselves on the front lines of whatever it is that they're trying to do. So the first act is going to be the preparation to put themselves on the front lines. Do they need a team? Then they have to go build a team. Do they need intelligence? Then they have to go find intelligence. And maybe they find that intelligence by spying, or maybe they find that intelligence by getting it from intelligence people that work for the same government that they do, or whatever. But whatever, all of this stuff is effort, and presumably it's not going to be easy to accomplish. You want there to always be conflict. So any character that they engage is not there to move the protagonist's journey forward. Any character they engage is there to move that own character's agenda forward. And you want to look for the ways in which each character's goals conflict with the protagonist's goals. And you just make it the protagonist's job to overcome those challenges. And your first act becomes the story of how the protagonist finishes their preparations for this thing they really shouldn't be doing, in spite of the fact that the odds are against them. That's it. And then, the moment when they do engage that risk, the moment when this candidate puts their name on the ballot, the moment when the soldier puts themselves on the front lines, then yes, things are getting more real at that point. The protagonist has put themselves in a situation where they have made things more real. And now you're in Act 2. That's how it works. And Act 2 is about the protagonist's efforts to accomplish a goal that is fundamentally unsustainable. They don't necessarily know that yet, or maybe they know it and they think they can overcome that challenge. But they have set out to accomplish something that is overwhelmingly challenging. They're not going to succeed. Inherently, they don't have the tools to succeed. And for one reason or another, they haven't made their peace with that yet. They're still going to go ahead and try their best. And they're going to try their best with the intention of succeeding rather than failing and saying they tried. Maybe they're lying to themselves, or maybe they think there's help coming. It doesn't matter. They do not have the tools to make this work, and they're going to try anyway. And every extra bit of effort that they put into making this goal happen is making their stock market bubble bigger. It's making the inevitable collapse and calamity of their failure bigger. The midpoint of the movie, when everyone understands the stakes of the film, is the moment when the protagonist, through their efforts to accomplish this goal, forces the antagonist, whoever they might be, to stop trying to minimize the damage and just deal with the threat that the protagonist poses. Right? If we're making a war movie about someone and they go on the front lines, the midpoint is the moment when the enemy makes it their business to deal with whatever this protagonist is doing. Up until then, they had other goals, they had other concerns, but the protagonist has made themselves a priority through their efforts to accomplish their goal. They have generated enough success where they're going to throw whatever they need to throw onto the battlefield, whatever they have access to, in order to make this problem go away, so that they can do what they're there to do. The antagonist can do what they're there to do. Okay? So that's the midpoint of the film. It's the point at which the protagonist pushes the unsustainability of what they're trying to achieve past the breaking point and now everything is starting to fall down on them. But they're not going to quit. Maybe they think they can outrun the collapse. Maybe they think they can get to the finish line of whatever they're trying to achieve faster than it can fall apart around them. Maybe they think that they're winning. Maybe they don't see the problem. Again, it doesn't matter. They are trying to accomplish something unsustainable. It's starting to collapse around them at the midpoint because they've pushed it to that point, to that level. And now, as we go into the second half of Act 2, we as the audience can start to see what a losing battle this is, and the protagonist just isn't letting it go. So they're going to push and push and push and push and push until all their resources are expended, until all possible opportunity for success has been eliminated, and to the point where anyone who might have been helping them is so hurt or damaged or violated by their efforts that all the relationships that made this possible are destroyed. The protagonist, in trying to accomplish this overwhelmingly challenging thing, strips all the gears and fuses the engine block. The stock market crashes, and it doesn't just wipe out the protagonist's portfolio, it wipes out the entire economy. That's the end of Act 2. So, in a very real sense, the end of Act 2, the tragedy, the calamity, the cataclysm that everyone wants to see at that end of Act 2 is not about the writer forcing some kind of disaster or some kind of worst-case scenario or some kind of consequence onto the protagonist. The protagonist has created this calamity for themselves, and they have created it to the most extreme possible degree through their efforts to accomplish their goal, which was never going to work. Now they realize that. Right? And they keep pushing and pushing and pushing until it's impossible not to realize that, until they've destroyed everything and there's just no getting around it. Now, going into Act 3, the most important thing to avoid here is having another character jump in, pat them on the shoulder, and say, "Hey, buddy, don't quit. We need you." Again, it is not the job of other characters to move the protagonist's goal forward. Each character has their own goal. They are trying to achieve their own things. The protagonist is the person in charge of the protagonist's goal. So even though things have gotten this bad, what did we say? We said that any actor's performance is built with two basic parts, action and motivation. We need that motivation to be so strong and so simple. Not reactive, not my daddy died and I think this is important because my daddy believed in it. No, this is something I know is important. And I'm not going to let it go. I just understand now that I have been going about it in a really destructive way. If I am going to do right by the people around me, I need to do this in a constructive way. I need to change myself. And at the end of Act 2, there's nothing left to change but the protagonist's own self. So they need to find a way forward. Maybe they ask for help and maybe they get turned down, but now they've started the process of asking and they can go find help wherever there is help to be found. It's their job to figure out what needs to change. And they don't have to do it alone, right? But they need to go get the help that they need. It's not the other character's job to make this happen. If other characters have been violated and hurt, they're trying to pursue their goals. If it's better for them in the pursuit of their goals to stay away from the protagonist, they're going to stay away from the protagonist. It's the protagonist's job to convince them to help or to find someone else. You see what I'm saying? Do not write a catharsis into the script to get the protagonist back onto their feet. Don't do it, because it's going to feel unearned. Instead, let the protagonist find their own way to reframe, redefine, or reapproach their goals in a way that can work and can get them ultimately the thing that they were always trying to get. Maybe they've misunderstood what that is. Maybe they need to simplify their plan, or maybe they need to dig much deeper than they ever thought they would. Maybe they need to get bigger and crazier. I don't know. It's going to be different from story to story. In our story about, the person running for president in a totalitarian regime, Either this person at the end of Act 2 is dead or they are in prison. One of those two things has to have happened. And if they're dead, then Act 3 is about the other people who are running the campaign assuming the leadership position that they never thought they would have to assume. They're digging deeper. They're finding new accountability. Everyone has to become a hero. Or if the candidate is in prison, then they need to run a campaign from prison, find a way to change their country from prison. You don't need to have another character step in and make it possible. You need to let the protagonist confront their accountability and their motivation and find a way forward. So what do we have? We have a number of story beats which are driven by the efforts of the protagonist, leading us from the beginning of the story through the middle of the story to the end of the story. We have the beginning of the movie, which is the very first effort of the protagonist to accomplish their goal. At the end of Act 1, 1/4 of the way through the script, we have turning point 1, which is when the character, the protagonist, exposes themselves to the risk and exposes themselves to the consequences of whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. They stop preparing, they stop hiding, and they put everything on the line in their efforts to make their goal happen. Right? If there's legal consequences for whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish, this is when they start committing crimes. If there's a chance that they might get shot, this is when they put themselves on the front line. If, that's how this works. And then the midpoint of the movie is the point where the efforts of the protagonist to accomplish their goal in all of those consequences force the sustainability of their plan to start teetering. Whoever the antagonist is, they are forced to start leveraging every possible resource that they have to make sure that they deal with whatever it is the protagonist is trying to accomplish. Right? If you're making a crime thriller, the reason why there's helicopters downtown at the midpoint of the movie is because whoever's stealing the art has become such a problem for the police that they're spending the money. They don't care what the news has to say about it. They are going to catch these people no matter how bad it looks for them. There's no other concern. And that's why there's helicopters all over the sky. You see what I'm saying? That's the midpoint of the film. The end of Act 2 is when the efforts of the protagonist to accomplish this unsustainable goal have rendered all of their resources and support systems and opportunities for success completely obliterated. And at that point, the only thing left to change is themselves. And Act 3 is the story of how they do that to maybe find success or maybe not, depending on whether the movie's a tragedy or a drama or a comedy or what have you. But at the very least, they need to find a new way, a much more profound, deeper, more invested way, and ultimately a more honest way to make their goal happen. Right? So you've got beginning, turning point 1, midpoint, turning point 2 at the end of Act 2, and the end. That's your outline. Okay? Write down the things the protagonist is doing to accomplish their goals that move the movie through those beats. And that is your outline. That is an arc of the action of the protagonist. Once you have that outline, you have the template for a treatment. Okay? So Act 1 is going to be 1 page of a 4-page. And this, by the way, this treatment is not a marketing tool. This is a writing tool. This is something you're writing for yourself to help flesh out your story. I don't want you to feel pressure to show this to anybody. You will rewrite this, probably as a 1-page document before you put it into a pitch deck or anything like that. So please don't try to pretty this up, because it's going to be much easier to fall back on passive writing habits and reactive storytelling if you're thinking about the reader. I don't want you thinking about the reader. Right? This is just for you to work stuff out. So you're going to write a 4-page treatment. The first page is the space between the beginning of the film and the end of the first turning point. And you're just going to write down all the things that the protagonist does to prepare for the beginning of Act 2 and to move their goal forward, and all the things that the other characters around them are doing to create conflict. You are writing actions. You are writing the efforts of your characters to accomplish their goals. Then, page 2 is the beginning of Act 2. It's the first turning point through the midpoint. So you're going to write down all the things that your protagonist is doing to push their goal past the point of sustainability to the point where everything starts to fall apart on them, and where the forces arrayed against them are no longer interested in half measures in the slightest, and they're absolutely engaging every resource they have to make sure that their goals prevail. Okay, everything the protagonist is doing and everything the characters around them are doing. Then you're going to write the second half of Act 2 from the midpoint to the second turning point. Everything the protagonist is doing to push their goal to the point where their efforts to accomplish this unsustainable thing have obliterated all of their opportunities for success and all their relationships and all of their resources, and there's nothing left. How did they burn everything that they had going for them in their efforts to accomplish this thing? And then on page 4 of the treatment, you're going to write everything that the protagonist does to move forward from that place where they don't have anything. And if they don't know where to start, they can ask. I've more than once, if I have a character, if I'm writing, I tend not to write spiritual content for myself, but I have written, as a script doctor, a lot of pieces for people who are deeply Christian. And that end of Act 2, like, it's you're going to talk to God if that's what you believe. You're going to say, what do I do? And maybe you don't get an answer, but now you've asked the question, and maybe you have to go ask someone else. Maybe there's someone, you're like, I'm not, but I can ask this person or that. Maybe I go ask the wife that I wronged so badly, and maybe she slams the door in my face, but now I've asked 2 people, and I'm going to go ask a third, and maybe I'm going to be a little smarter about who I approach this time. There's always something a character can do to move their goal forward, even if they feel like it's hopeless. They have to have the motivation to move the effort forward and find hope. They have to have a strong enough motivation that no matter how bad things get at the end of Act 2, they can't let themselves quit. Because spectacle is watching people do things we didn't realize people could do. The thing that makes this movie spectacular, the thing that makes it powerful, is the fact that this character does change themselves in order to accomplish something bigger than themselves. In order to make this thing happen, they turn themselves from the person who was always doomed to failure into the person who was born to succeed. So that's your treatment. Once you've got your treatment and you know what story you're telling, this isn't something that I'm necessarily going to spend a lot of time on, so I'll just mention it here. I always recommend writing 2 pages on each primary character, between 2 and 6 characters, each really important character to the story. And this is just to get you loose. This isn't structured. This is just free thinking, detail generation, just to break the ice and get you inhabiting these characters a little bit more easily. So what I do to make sure that I'm just, whacking through that ice and not stressing out about whether those details are good or bad, I set a timer for 30 minutes. And I just keep writing until those 2 pages are done. And I make sure it's done before the bell goes off. So if I don't know what to write about a character, I'll ask myself questions. What games did they play as a child? What's their favorite ice cream flavor? Or whatever you like. But just keep writing until 2 pages are full. And make sure that you don't spend too much time on it. And by the time you do that, your brain's going to be a little bit more loose, a little bit more ready to generate details on the fly about those characters. You're going to be able to be a little bit more specific about how those characters achieve their goals because you got a better sense of where they're coming from. Those details, they don't need to be right or wrong. It's not important. Don't save the 2 pages. You're just cracking the stone, so you can get at the crystals. That's all you're doing. And with that, you got plenty to do this week, so go do it. Thank you very much for being here for the right stuff, and I look forward to learning with you.